So I was.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, shall we get started? Well, we already had a warm-up exercise with the clapping. Thanks so much. I checked it out on my phone. It looked outstanding. Thank you for your enthusiasm, which I know will continue for the next 3.5 hours while Ted does a presentation here. You are here at the Cowlitz County Historical Museum because you want to hear about postal. Oh, thanks. Because you want to hear about postal history of Cowlitz County. I'm Joseph Govednik. I'm the director of the Cowlitz County Historical Museum. Do I need to use the microphone, or are you okay with me talking like this? Let's use the microphone. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead and use the microphone. I'll keep my comments very brief here, actually. I just have a few reminders that our annual membership meeting is this Sunday at noon. And if you want to RSVP for that, you can do that tonight, or you can reply to the email that you got in your inbox to Joanna Rowland, who is our office manager. Let us know. If you're not a member, we do have membership forms in the back, and you're welcome to join us and become a member, and we will honor that membership for the balance of this year and into all of 2025. And you can have a nice Mexican lunch and program on this Sunday at 12 o'clock. We also have our first Thursday, next one is scheduled for November 7th, which I just found out that the speaker had to cancel, and we're going to postpone that one. This happened, it's the same speaker from September, so we're going to do a little dance, and we're going to find another program. But I think enough of that. I want to talk about Ted for a minute here, because Ted's been hanging around here an awful lot the last 1.5 years, 2 years, in this room, as a matter of fact. And in Bill's work area. Bill's our curator, researching and looking through newspapers and working on this book, Postal History of Cowlitz County, Washington, right, Ted?
Yes.
Yes, I have the, yeah, as opposed to Nebraska. And so I bought a copy of it, and we have other copies of it available here at our gift shop. So if you are interested, after hearing Ted talk, to learn everything about postal history of Cowlitz County, Washington, go ahead to our gift shop, purchase the book, and come back here, and Ted will be set up at the table here where he can sign a author's copy for you. And the other thing too, with Ted being here so much, I noticed he comes to our programs, he's a member, he's doing research, and I thought one day I sharked around him and I said, Ted, how would you like to get on our board? And so he's also a board member of the Cowlitz County Historical Society. So we are very thankful to have him with us. And Ted, I believe you're also with the Friends of Galileo Astronomy Club too. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ted, because I think he's going to have an awesome program here, and I hope you enjoy learning everything there is about local postal history. And so let's give Ted a super live, warm welcome.
I don't know. I think the first one was a little louder. So before I begin, just say a couple things here. Some people think postal history may be boring, and thank you. Well, and if I wrote the book just for an audience of postal historians, I might have sold 20 copies of it. But I've written the book so that it would appeal to anybody not just interested in the postal history of Cowlitz County, but in the general history of the area. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the presentation. The other thing I'll mention too, after the presentation, I've got some of the applications for a few of the Cowlitz County post offices up here, dating from like 1880s all the way up to the Longview post office in 1922. So you're welcome to come up and take a look at their copies, so you don't have to worry about soiling them or anything like that. But anyway, let me, I'm going to minimize the zoom here. I think. No, I'm not. Sorry. There we go. And then we want to minimize that. There we go. And then I want to share a screen.
Share?
What's that? No, I was trying to minimize the window with all the participants in it here. So I'm going to share this one. And then if I do this, then I can do that, and we get rid of that. And this will go away momentarily here, I think. All right. All right. Zoom. I haven't done Zoom for a while here, but anyway, this is a copy of the book cover, and maybe you recognize it. And I have set up an email address specifically for questions about the book or anything about the subject matter. CowlitzBook@gmail.com, and the book also has a website, and strangely enough, the name is CowlitzBook.com. All right. Some of you may know, but I used to be a teacher, and I taught at UNLV for 5 years, and I gave these things called pop quizzes, and students just absolutely hated them. And so maybe I should have called this fun game instead of pop quiz. Okay, so let's pretend that's a typo. It says fun game. So my question will start out with, let's see if as a group we can name the 10 post offices that are still operating in Cowlitz County. Okay, you can't play. Okay. But while we're doing that, after this, I want to do a couple introductions that I skipped over here. But anyway, so anybody want to shout out a few here? Longview, we got one. Castle Rock, Kelso. I'm sorry, Carroll's. That's it. Kalama, Woodland, Tootle. No, wrong county.
Damn. How many is that?
That's 7. So we've got 3 more. Stella used to, but not anymore. So let's see. We've got to think for 2 of them. We've got to think. No, we've got to think south for 1. Silver Lake used to have 1, and north for the other. Amboy is in Clark County. Riderwood is 1. I think we've got 8. Ariel is 1. There's 1 more. Cougar. There we go. Tina should know that one. Okay, very good. 10 out of 10. That's an A for everybody. And here's the answers, of course. Before I begin, I kind of screwed up. I wanted to make a few introductions here of people who've contributed to the book. I began working on this book about 6 years ago, and not full-time, of course, but here and there. And over the course of that, I've met a number of great people who have contributed various items to the book, mainly pictures and other information. So many of the pictures you'll see tonight are from the collection of Tim and Angie Boardman, right here in front. Stand up if you like. Tim is the author of the Washington Post Office's book that he's working on an update for that now. He's also the author of the Washington Territorial Postmark Catalog, and we'll talk a little bit about what a postmark catalog is at the end of the presentation. Then back, we have Angela Stevenson from the Longview Public Library. She's the curator of the Longview Room, and she's dug through a lot of old photographs for me, especially from Longview and Riderwood, and they appear in the book, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Angela. I have Laura McCartney from the Stella Historical Society, and a few of the ladies from there as well, who've put me in touch with different people in the area, and I've dug through pictures from Susie Richards' collection, finding some great imagery from those that appear in the book. And I think I've got everybody who's in attendance here. So anyway, let's go on. What's postal history? That's a really good question. You could probably ask 20 people who collect postal history or study postal history, and then give you 20 different answers. But I think everybody will agree that there's some commonality here. It involves studying the post offices and collecting and documenting their postmarks, studying up postal routes and postal rates, postal laws and regulations, and basically any other areas related to the carriage of mail. But I kind of think of it as a more generic term, and I think it's local history told from the perspective of the post office, and that's how I've written the book. A few terms we'll introduce here that I'll mention tonight. What's a cover? Well, a cover is simply a term for an envelope. And why is it called a cover? Well, until about the mid-1850s, or mid-19th century, it was common practice when people wrote a letter, they would fold the sheets together into a shape about the size of a small envelope and then seal it with wax or some other adhesive. and that's just called a folded letter. Well, envelopes became more popular about this time, and so people would stick these sheets of paper instead of sealing with wax, stick them into an envelope like we do today, and mail them. And the envelope was said to cover the contents, hence the term. Even though cover is strictly an envelope, it's common practice among postal historians to use the term cover to reference an envelope, a postcard, a postal card, anything that bears a postmark that's been through the mail. Here's a quick look at the table of contents here. I'm not going to go through it, but we're going to talk about, most of the stuff we're going to talk about today comes out of chapter 2, because I think that's the most appealing to the general audience. And this is also available if you want to see it. If you don't buy the book and just want to see it, it's on the book's website. Let's talk about Washington Territory. The first chapter of the book talks about the creation of Cowlitz County. And we should probably get started with the creation of Oregon Territory, which was created in August of 1848. Now, Oregon Territory included all of this area that is currently shown on the screen. It is all of Oregon and Washington, all of Idaho, and parts of western Montana and western Wyoming. Well, in 1853, Washington Territory was created from Oregon Territory, and it contained the areas that are shown in green and yellow. And that was March 2nd, 1853, when Washington Territory was created. Oregon became a state in 1859, and when Oregon achieved statehood, that part of Oregon Territory east of that line that is currently the Oregon's eastern state boundary, shown in red, was added to Washington Territory. So at this point, Washington Territory has the greatest area extents that it ever had. Idaho Territory was created in 1863, and the areas that are in yellow and red were part of the original Idaho Territory. That brought Washington Territory to its current shape, which is also the current shape of Washington State. Cowlitz County. Cowlitz County was one of 8 counties created by the first session of the Washington Territorial Legislature in 1854. And the first year or so, the county boundary changes really got into the weeds. That's how things changed very frequently and kind of in an arbitrary way in some cases. So I'm not going to talk about that, but starting in January 1855, the county boundaries were more well-defined and stable. So that's where we're going to be the starting point here. So the original Cowlitz County contained the area shown in yellow and blue. Those places on the map did not exist at the time except for Castle Rock. About the only other settlements in the county at the time were Oak Point and Monticello. The blue area, which is a strip of land, 1 township or 6 miles wide, was lost to Clark County in 1867. But Cowlitz County gained that back along with the areas in green and red in November of 1871. That later area in 1871 contained 3 post offices, Kalama, Martins Bluff, and Pekin, as well as the site of a post office called Davenport that may have operated at the current site of Kalama. The red area then was lost to Clark County in November of 1873, and that brought Cowlitz County to its current shape. That is the yellow, blue, and green areas. Mainly for the benefit of those watching on Zoom from out of town here, this is where Cowlitz County is located in the state of Washington, as long as with the counties that border it on all sides. On the southwest, its border is the Columbia River, which separates Washington and Oregon. 45 post offices have operated in what is now Cowlitz County, and we know of postmarks exist from 42 of them. The 3 that are unknown are called Davenport, Lower Cowlitz, and Olaquah. There was an Olaquah spelled with an E, O-L-E-Q-U-A, that's quite common. But the Olaquah spelled O-L-O-Q-U-A is unknown, and that was one of the predecessors of the later Olaquah office. The only other thing that's important on this is some of the dates are separated by dashes and some by slashes. The dash means that the post office operated continually during that period. The slash means that it operated in 2 or more periods during that time. So for example, let's pick Cougar. It says 1902/date. Well, it operated from 1902 to 1903, 1906 to 36, and 1941 to date. So 3 different periods for the Cougar Post Office. This map is included in the book, and it shows all 45 post offices that have operated in Cowlitz County. The names that are in uppercase mean that that post office is still operating. Lowercase means that post office has been discontinued. The names that are in parentheses show names of post offices that operated at that earlier operated at that same site. The arrows show major moves for a given post office. For example, Tower up in the top right there, it moved a little bit to the east and then it moved a little bit west. So it operated in at least 3 different locations. The arrows don't show simple moves like when a post office moves down the block or something like that or across the street. It doesn't show those, but just major moves for the post offices. This graph shows the distribution of number of operating offices in Cowlitz County, and it peaks in 1902 at the maximum of 26 post offices that have ever operating at the same time. And the structure of this graph mirrors that of most states. That is, a lot of post offices were established early on. So more post offices were initially established. And then over time, as areas consolidated, post offices became discontinued. And so after the peak in 1902, we see a gradual decline up until about 1930 or thereabouts. And as I said, that's pretty common post office distribution for any state or any region. Note after 1940 is very little activity. There's only one post office discontinued in 1985. Anyone want to take a gander as to what that one was? No. What's that? It was on the way to Mount St. Helens. Silver Lake closed in 1985. So very briefly, how did a post office get established? Well, the area residents would pick somebody who would volunteer to be the postmaster, and they would send a request to the post office department saying, hey, we'd like to establish a post office here. In turn, the post office department would send a form back and ask them to fill out all sorts of information. And I have some of these forms for Cowlitz County post offices up on the table here. You're welcome to come up and look at them after the presentation. But then the postmaster, the proposed postmaster, would complete this form and fill out all sorts of information about where the post office was located. Was it on an existing mail route? If not, how far away was it from a mail route? What population would it serve? Where is it located in surveyed coordinates? That is section, range, and township, if that was a whole bunch of other information. And then up until about 1906, the postmaster from a nearby post office would have to validate this information and return this back to the post office department. The department would then make a decision, and if approved, the first postmaster was appointed. That is the date that postal historians call the date a post office was established, when the first postmaster was appointed. It does not mean that was the date the post office actually began operating, especially in earlier periods. So the appointed postmaster then has to supply a bond to the post office department, kind of like a background check, so to speak here, but a monetary bond in most cases. The post office department then commissions that postmaster and supplies materials, stamps, postmarking device, postal paper, anything else, money order forms if appropriate, anything else which is needed. And then the post office can begin operating. And now we'll look at some postmarks from a few of the more important Cowlitz County post offices. Monticello was the first post office established in Cowlitz County. It was established in 1850 while this area was still part of Oregon Territory. That is before Washington Territory was created in 1853. Closed in 1876. Now, one thing about this postmark, there's a couple things to mention. Note that in the upper left corner is the postmark. It says on the top line Monticello, and then in the line below it, it's WT for Washington Territory, April 15. Well, this is called a manuscript postmark. And you don't see these today for obvious reasons. But back in the day, when a new post office was established, the post office department did not supply postmarking devices to the postmaster. The postmaster could either cancel mail by hand, as in this case, or purchase their own, or make their own postmark device. And that's why in the early years, there's quite a variety of different postmarks. But postmarks applied in manuscript are quite common. We'll see quite a few of those. This cover, it dates from 1860 or 61. And the reason we know that is because it's April 15. And the earliest use of this stamp is after that date in 1859. And then in September of 1861, the stamp was demonetized. Its value was taken away. Anybody want to take a gander at why that would happen? Civil War, exactly. These stamps were in Southern post office. Stamps were as good as currency. And so the post office department demonetized them, issued new sets of stamps in 1861. So this stamp here, this envelope has to be from 1860 or 61. This is the earliest known postmark from Cowlitz County. It's another manuscript, Oak Point. Where's the stamp? Well, the first U.S. postage stamps were issued in 1847. These were distributed primarily to post offices, larger post offices in the eastern United States. Very few of them made their way west. The next series of stamps was issued in 1851 when postal rates changed. And these were supplied, these had more widespread distribution, but to the more remote post offices, and by this time, Cowlitz County, any place in Cowlitz County would be considered remote. Pretty much any place in Washington would be considered remote. So that they did not have stamps yet. In that case, the postmaster the patron could come in when he mails this letter, come in and say it's going to cost 6 cents to mail this letter. We'll talk about why in a few minutes. The patron gives the postmaster 6 cents. The postmaster marks paid 6. That's as good as a stamp if you don't have any stamps. Now, how old is this cover? How do we know? Well, it says Oak Point WT, November 1. And so it's either from 1853 or 54. Why? Well, Washington Territory was created when? March of 1853. So it can't be 1852 or before. It has to be 1853 or later. The postage rate for letters over that traveled over 3,000 miles was raised from 6 cents per half ounce to 10 cents per half ounce in July of 1855. So since this is November and it's a 6 cent rate, the 6 cent rate would not be possible in 1855. So it has to be 1853 or 54. Even if it is 1854, it is the earliest known postmark from what's now Cowlitz County. How did this cover get there? It was sent to Hebron, New York, which is a small town on the Vermont border, north of Albany. How did it get there? Well, 3,000 miles. Well, I could travel to New York in 3,000 miles. Well, in this day, you couldn't. The overland mail didn't begin until 1858. And so how'd this letter get there? Well, best guess is it traveled the Columbia River Steamboat mail route from Oak Point down to Astoria, got on an ocean-going vessel to Astoria, probably went to San Francisco. From San Francisco, it got on another ship, or possibly the same ship continued, to the west coast of Panama, Central America. Of course, the canal didn't exist then, 1853 or 54. So the letter was carried by hand over the Isthmus of Panama, about 40 miles from the Pacific side to the Atlantic side, got on another ocean-going ship, probably to New York, possibly Boston, but most likely New York, and then traveled overland mail routes from New York to Hebron, to New York City or Boston to Hebron, New York. How long did this take? Well, it depends. If you mailed a letter on the day the ship was leaving, you probably got lucky. But sometimes you might get another ship for 2 weeks. And then you're also dealing with getting the letter on the mail route from Astoria, from Oak Point to Astoria. That didn't happen every day either. So timing was everything, but would not be uncommon for a letter like this to take 30 to 60 days to reach its destination. So it's about the same as today. This is the earliest known use of stamps from Cowlitz County. This was from issues from the 1851 issue. This was to Oregon. And so the rate at the time was 3 cents per ounce for letters traveling under 3,000 miles. And certainly this was just going to Oregon. By the way, this is a very rare Oregon town, Laurel, Oregon. It only had a post office for like 1 year. So this is, I don't know if any postmarks are known from there, but this postmark is from 1855. The first Oak Point postmaster was Alexander Abernethy. Not Abernathy like the creek, that got screwed up somewhere along the line, and the pioneer family is named Abernethy with an E. He was the first postmaster at Oak Point, serving from 1851 until 1880, and this was his personal mail. Now, until 1874, postmasters had what was called a free frank privilege, where they could send personal mail free of charge. Nope, and yeah, that's a pretty good deal. So in order to do that, you had the right the word free, or stamp the word free as Postmaster Abernethy did in this case, and then sign your name and sign that you were the PM. So it's A.S. Abernethy PM with his little free hand stamp there. So he mailed this letter from Oak Point to Oregon City. And he had a very distinctive handwriting, which was quite different from any handwriting of the time. This is a later picture of Oak Point from about 1910, showing the waterfront there and the docks. That building is the Hammond Lumber Company's store, and it housed the post office the Oak Point post office from 1907 to 25, except for a brief period in 1915 and 16. A lot of stuff to say about this cover here, Castle Rock. Let's look at first. Castle Rock was established in 1854. It was the third or fourth, I don't recall which, post office established in Cowlitz County. Can't remember if it came first or Pekin came first. It was changed to Castle Rock, one word, in 1895. Changed back to two words in 1930. What the heck is going on there? Okay. Well, some person in the post office department had the brilliant idea about 1893 or thereabouts to simplify post office names. And there were a number of rules that they adopted, but one of the most common ones was post offices that were two words or three words in length would be shortened to a single word. Larger cities such as San Francisco were generally exempt from these rules, but Castle Rock, not being San Francisco, was subject to it. But the clincher was, and this wasn't known for some time, is that these changes only occurred with a change of postmaster. So Oak Point, which was two words, had the same postmaster from 1880 to 1905. So it escaped this 1890s hubbub of changing post office names. So it always remained two words. Castle Rock did not. A postmaster was appointed on June 8, 1895, and as a result became one word to two words. Two words to one word, I'm sorry. Other items of this cover, it's a manuscript postmark was received from October 1880. William Huntington was the first Castle Rock postmaster, and the first Castle Rock post office, when it was established in 1884, was situated on his land claim, which occupies the area north, including and south of that big rock formation that everybody knows as Castle Rock. The post office was at his homestead on south of the rock, kind of near where that little picnic area is, if you're familiar with that area, right below the rock there along the main road coming into Castle Rock. And he was postmaster until 1859. Then in 1859, I always forget which Jackson it is here. It is William Jackson. He became postmaster in 1859. Now he operated, he had a residence about 2 miles west of Castle Rock, across the Cowlitz River. And he was fortunate because he learned that in 1859, the military road, which was one of the first roads in the territory, it went between Vancouver and Fort Steilacoom up near Olympia. And he happened to say that the military road, he happened to find out, was going to pass right by his house. So he converted his residence into a way station or an inn called the Jackson Inn. And about that time, then the Castle Rock Post Office moved into the Jackson Inn in 1859. So it was Castle Rock Post Office was not in what is now Castle Rock during that time. Rather, it was across the Cowlitz River, about 2 miles away. That was the case until 1872. William Huntington was reappointed postmaster at that time, and the post office moved back across to the east side of the Cowlitz River at Huntington's Riverbank residence, which is about the same location as where the bridge across the Cowlitz River, the east side of the bridge in Castle Rock meets the Cowlitz River. One other thing to point out, this says, have your mail addressed to street and number. What does that mean? Well, originally, people had to go in to the post office to collect their mail. So if I'm writing a letter to somebody in Portland, I'll say, this is for Joe Blow in Portland, Oregon. Joe Blow comes into the post office, hey, you got any mail for Joe Blow? Yep, here you go. Well, in October 1879, city delivery was established in Portland. And this meant the post office had carriers which would come out like today and deliver or lose your mail. So the sender of this envelope either was not aware of that or chose to ignore it. But there was no street address here, and this is from 1880. So the Portland Post Office has applied this auxiliary marking saying, have your mail addressed to street and number, hoping that the sender of this would notify the recipient of this would notify the sender that they, hey, you should provide a better address here. But they still delivered it anyway. One other thing interesting about this cover, it's addressed to Judge P.A. Marquand. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah, he was a transportation advocate and the namesake for Portland's Marquand Bridge. Now, the 1-word and 2-word changed. Many of the post offices whose names were shortened eventually went back to their original form. In 1930, the U.S. Geographic Board of Names made a decision that the correct spelling of Castle Rock, Washington was 2 words. And so the post office in April 1930 changed from 1 word back to 2 words. And that's why we know it today. Now, interestingly, most of the time when the post office was 1 word, the town itself still referred to itself by 2 words. Yeah. There were a couple of exceptions, but mainly the post office was the only one who called it 2 words. 1 word, I should say. Water break here. This is a picture of Alonzo Carner's General Store in Castle Rock. And it was on the southwest corner of Cowlitz Street and First Avenue in Castle Rock. And there is a post office, there is a general store on the first floor that housed the post office. And can't really see it too well here. Maybe on the door right here, it says U.S. Post Office, Castle Rock, Washington. And if you look very closely in the original picture, it is 1 word. So, Carner, he knew the deal. Up on the second floor was an Oddfellows Hall. Why was the post office in the general store? Well, about this time, only about 1% of the post offices in the United States were located in government-owned or government-leased facilities. It was very common practice in towns, even the size of Castle Rock, and certainly in smaller towns, to have the post office located inside a general store or some other business owned by the postmaster, a member of the postmaster's family, or postmaster's friend or the like. The idea was that having people come in, because remember, they didn't have street delivery here in Castle Rock in 1910. The idea is come into the post office and get your mail, and while you're there, you'll buy some stuff at the store. So the belief was that a store that housed the post office had a distinct advantage over a competing store that did not have the post office. And this building housed the Castle Rock Post Office from 1904 to 13. The Castle Rock Bank building, that may look familiar to some people because it still stands. Okay. It's located on the northwest corner of Cowlitz Street and Front Avenue. In 1913, the post office moved there shortly after the building was constructed. The post office was in this storefront right here. Okay. And my barber today is right here, and this is a bookstore. So that's where it operated there for almost 30 years across many postmasters. Well, we mentioned Jackson, the name Jackson a while ago. Well, a post office was established at the Jackson Inn long after the Jackson Inn faded in importance, because after the railroad was built on the west side of the Cowlitz River through this area in about 1871-72, the military road became less important, as you can imagine. So little traffic at the Jackson Inn, but still there were a number of settlers around the area. So a post office was applied for and established in 1883. William Jackson was the first postmaster, and it only operated the Jackson Inn for about a year, and then it moved to a store owned by the next postmaster, William Whittle. And Whittle's land included the area on the west side of the Cowlitz River that now includes Castle Rock High School and the area immediately south. Here's a picture of the Jackson Inn. I'm not sure when this picture was exactly taken, but as we said, this is where the Jackson Post Office existed from 1883 to 84, and the Castle Rock Post Office from 1859 to 72 when it was located on the west side of the river. The Jackson Inn was restored starting about 1850, but has since again fallen into disrepair, is my understanding. Freeport. Anybody know where Freeport was? That name may sound familiar. It was pretty close to here. You know where Hudson Street is in Longview? go to the end of Hudson Street until you can't drive anymore, or else you end up in the river. They are there, and immediately north was the town of Freeport. It was a pretty important town at one time. It was the county seat from 1865 to 1872. And this is another manuscript postmark here. It is addressed to Astoria from Freeport, so it should have gone down. At the time, there was an overland mail route that went from Freeport to Vancouver, Washington. So it should have traveled that overland mail route and then taken the Columbia River Steamboat mail route from Vancouver to Astoria. Well, post office was just practicing, so they accidentally sent the letter eastbound, and 8 days later it wound up in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I'm not sure how that happened, but the Salt Lake City post office applied a postmark showing it was there with the label missent, with the auxiliary marking missent, and then it went on its merry way to Astoria. And I'm guessing that chicken scratch at the left is how they're figuring out how it got from one place to the other or something. Here's a picture of Freeport in about 1888. And the building at far right is the store owned by Olaf Olson, pioneer merchant. And that housed the Freeport post office from 1870 all the way until it was closed in 1893. Kalama. How many Kalamas were there? 2. Very good. Somebody read my article from the Quarterly a couple of years ago. There were 2. The first Kalama predates the current Kalama. The current Kalama had its beginnings when the Northern Pacific Railroad decided to build its tracks northward from that point on the Columbia River to Puget Sound. So Kalama was a bustling railroad town, but that didn't happen until like early 1871, late 1870. Why was there a post office established as soon as 1868? Well, there was a different Kalama. And this location of this Kalama was about 5 miles north of the present Kalama. If you're familiar with the intersection of the old Pacific Highway or the old 99 South and Rose Valley Road, it was very near that intersection. There's a little creek that flows through there called Owl Creek, and it was on the south bank of Owl Creek. No postmarks are known from that earlier Kalama. So if you have one, we need to talk. But it was established in October 1868 and then closed 1 month later, discontinued 1 month later. Well, the post office almost certainly never operated during this time because it would take certainly more than 1 month in 1868 between the time the postmaster was appointed until the office would actually begin operating. What happened here? Well, there was a mail route that ran between Vancouver and Pekin. Pekin was at the just at the time just a little bit south of Woodland, and the Pekin that mail route was extended north from Pekin to Freeport in 1868, October 1868. It was supposed to happen on October 1st. So when the postmaster, his name was Isla S. Bennett, submitted a form in September of 1868, he said, hey, this post office is going to be right directly on this new mail route. Well, that was a real plus for post offices because if the post office didn't have to establish any new mail routes, then you're almost guaranteed to get a post office. It's very minimal work to get one started there and not have to do any further work on and establish a new route. So what happened? Well, my belief is that this post office, that this mail route, the start that was supposed to be on October 1st of 1868 got delayed for some reason. I don't know why. And so when the post office department figured this out, they said, hey, this post office is not on any mail route, discontinue it. So it never went into operation. After the mail route was in place in January of 1869, sometime between then and the time it was discontinued, this mail route actually did begin. And so Kalama was then on a mail route. But the first postmaster, Bennett, was never commissioned, and that means the office never operated. I believe that the office, if it did operate, probably started around May or June of 1869, because that's when it probably actually began operating. Now, what happened? You see, this one was discontinued January 25, and then the current Kalama, the office was reestablished January 24, 1871. What the heck does that mean? Well, at the time, 1871, early 1871, the boundary between Clark and Cowlitz counties was basically the Kalama River. Not quite, but at this point, this far west, considering the Kalama River is the boundary. The Kalama number 1 was in Cowlitz County at the time. Kalama number 2 was in Clark County. And so the post office department apparently didn't bother to check the records to see if there was another Kalama post office in Cowlitz County, because we're establishing this one in Clark County. Well, somebody caught it, and they then, I guess their best solution was, well, you know, this new post office is going to be a big railroad town here. It needs a post office. Let's just discontinue old Kalama, which has, you know, which hasn't had that much business. I guess that's pretty much what happened. This is one of the earliest known postmarks from the new Kalama, May of 1871. Now, Kalama at this time, population estimates range from a conservative 500 to about 3,000 people, all railroad workers, because the Northern Pacific Railroad, this was their, excuse me, their base of construction. Manuscript postmarks from Kalama are known in 3 different handwritings of this time. What does that mean? It means that the Kalama postmaster had some help canceling mail. Could you imagine canceling, if every person mailed 1 letter a day, canceling 500 letters a day by hand like this? No, that probably didn't go over too well. Here's a picture of Kalama in 1894. And these buildings are along the north side of what's now Fur Street, was Fur Street also then. This building right here, the smaller one, that's where the Kalama post office was in 1894 and stayed there until about 1905, I believe. Oh my God, so much is wrong here. All right. Okay. This postcard is what's called a divided back postcard. Prior to March 31st, 1907, you could only write the address side on the address side of the postcard. Starting March 31, 1907, they had cards, started publishing cards with divided backs where you could write a message on the left-hand side and the address on the right-hand side. Okay, so far so good. Postmark is January 3rd, 1907. Well, couldn't be 1907 for 2 reasons. One is divided back postcards didn't exist until March 31, 1907. The other reason, these Swiss transit postmarks and receiving postmarks are all have a year of 08. Well, it doesn't take a year for mail to get from Kalama to Switzerland, even back then. So the first thing that was wrong is the Kalama post office clerk or postmaster, or whoever was canceling the mail, neglected to change the date slug in the postmark from 1907 to 1908. So it was really mailed in 08. So that's the first thing. The next thing, the sender. The rate for sending a postcard to Europe and most international destinations at the time was 2 cents. The person who sent this affixed a 1 cent stamp. So it was short paid by 1 cent. So in Switzerland, Swiss postal authorities were allowed to collect that extra 1 cent due. But on short paid mail such as this, the postage due was twice the deficient amount, so 2 cents. At the time, international mail was rated in something called centimes, Swiss gold centimes, with 5 centimes equal 1 cent. So this marking with the T applied in New York is means basically to pay, and right next to it there's a partial centimes 10. So there's 10 centimes or 2 cents postage due. So when the letter reached Switzerland, there was a 10 centime postage due stamp canceled in Zurich. Well, the letter was addressed, the card was addressed to somebody who had moved. Okay, so it had to be forwarded. All right, now imagine doing all this for 3 cents. Okay. They really got their money's worth on this one. So the address is scratched out, and it is in pencil notation poste restant. And that is a fancy French word, but it basically is the same thing as what general delivery means in the United States. So this person was living temporarily in Zurich, the recipient, Elizabeth Giss. Elizabeth Giss was actually a university student in Zurich, Switzerland. Now, the other thing that's wrong with it, look at the lower right. It's addressed to Zurich, Schweiz, Germany. Well, Schweiz is the German word for Switzerland. So why would they say Switzerland, Germany? Okay, well, obviously there is no such place as Switzerland, Germany. Switzerland has been Switzerland. And so that was a mistake. What's interesting is I mentioned that the recipient, Elizabeth Giss, was a university student in Zurich, and apparently she graduated from the university over there because the 1910 federal census shows her as a school teacher in Clickitat County, Washington. And she kept this card. Silver Lake. This is a kind of an interesting one. We talked about 2-word and 1-word names. Silver Lake has always been 2 words, but all but the earliest postmark from Silver Lake, for some reason, show the post office name as 1 word, even though it was always 2 words, official records. So this is what's called a type 5 postmark. We'll talk about the postmark types here with the postmark catalog. The Frank Barnes store, about 1912, housed the Silver Lake post office until it burned in 1925. Frank Barnes was the Silver Lake postmaster from 1893 to 1920, quite a long period of time. During this period, he was also a state senator, owned a logging company with a partner up in the Silver Lake area, had a lot of business interests. And again, here was the case where the post office is in the Barnes store. So if you're going to go pick up your mail, you're going to buy something from the Barnes store instead of Fred Meyer's down the street. This is the last Silver location of the Silver Lake post office. This photo is from 1972. And if you know where the Silver Lake Grange building is now, this was just a little bit, maybe 1/8 of a mile or so east of there on the north side of Spirit Lake Highway. No trace of this is there. There's just an empty lot. Woodland. Well, here's something interesting. Established in 1882, name changed to Kearns in 1890, and reestablished in November 1890. What the heck is going on here? Well, Christopher Columbus, or C.C. Bozorth, was Woodland's first postmaster. He established a store, and he was the postmaster appointed in 1882. He had a nephew named Adolphus Lee Lewis, and Adolphus Lee Lewis became postmaster in February of 1890. Well, Woodland town site had been platted in September, I think, of 1889, October 1889. A couple months before that, his nephew Lewis platted a competing town site called Kearns, about 1.5 miles up the Lewis River from Woodland. So when Lewis became postmaster, he moved the Woodland post office up into his store in the Kearns town site. And he kept the name Woodland initially, but in October of 1890 changed its name to Kearns. Why did he do that? Most commonly accepted reason is because he wanted it to match the name of his town site. And his town site was named for his wife, Nellie Kearns. So maybe got some points with the wife too. But then when the former Woodland postmaster Bozorth learned of this, he applied for a post office again in his store, although he was not postmaster when it was reestablished. And then in November of 1890, the post office was reestablished, although it didn't begin operating there until January of 1891. And of course, Woodland's still operating today. Here's a postmark from Kearns. As you can see, post office name was changed from Woodland after moving there earlier in 1890, and it didn't last that long, closed in 1906. Why did it close? Woodland was becoming a more important town. Woodland was incorporated in 1906, and so Kearns basically was integrated into Woodland. Here's a picture of Kearns about 1900. It's basically built along a bend in the Lewis River. As you're heading up toward Cougar from Woodland, there is a traffic circle there. And if you know where that traffic circle is, Kearns was just right southeast of there, right along the river. Here's Woodland, 1908. It's called Front Street then. It's now called Garrick Street. Hasn't changed a bit, has it? Stella. Got to include these for our representatives from the Stella Historical Museum here and Stella Historical Society. There's a postmark from Stella. This is the type 5 postmark. That means it's the 5th different postmark type documented from Stella. June 19, 1907. Now, you people from the Stella cannot play this, okay? Yeah. 5 weeks later, something happened. Anybody know what it was? You know, you can't play either. Okay, well, one of the Stella people tell us, please. Yeah, I got a hot tip. Fire. Major fire. Okay, Stella was basically built along the waterfront. So this split view postcard shows a view sometime before the fire, and at the bottom view, the aftermath. Basically, all of those buildings on the right-hand side gone. One of those buildings was the store owned by Postmaster Christian Struckmeyer, and that contained the post office since he was the postmaster. Again, here we are, general store, post office. The postmark device shown in the previous slide was lost in the fire. And so they had to make do with what's called an emergency manuscript postmark. So this was the only known example of this postmark. It dates from 3 days after the fire, July 30, 1907. They canceled it by hand as an emergency postmark since they had nothing else to postmark mail. The last line of the message says, "I am at Oak Point, Washington." That's a couple miles downriver from Stella. I don't know if that means it for sure, but it could mean that the sender was displaced by the fire. After the Stella postmaster, Struckmeyer, got tired of writing Stella, Washington on a bunch of mail, they improvised some sort of local hand stamp here as another emergency postmark. There's two examples known of this one from August 14, another from August 22. The Post Office Department eventually, of course, supplied Stella with a new postmark device. That's the one shown here. The earliest known use is October 3rd of 1907. So August, September, a little more than 2 months after the fire, they had a new postmark device, possibly even before that. And this is an example from a little bit later from one of the pioneers of Stella, the Wiest family, shown in 1908. Here's Stella showing what had been rebuilt. This building right over here, this is in 1916. This is, where did my mouse go there? This building right here is Struckmeyer's new store, and the post office was in that building, and the entrance to it was right here under that awning right there. Eufaula was a lumber camp. It was the headquarters for the B.F. Brock Lumber Company. Post office established in 1895. Brock was the first postmaster and held that position until he sold his holdings in 1903. However, Brock really didn't tend to the day-to-day duties of the post office. He had clerks in the store handling those duties. So he was really kind of postmaster in name only. This is a picture of the Brock Company store about 1900, thanks to the folks from Stella. And it housed the post office from 1895 to 1909, when it was moved into the residence of the newly appointed postmaster. This is a postmark from Coweeman. Some people thought this was up on the Coweeman River somewhere. Nope, it wasn't. It was a small railroad station before Kelso existed, about a half mile north of what's now downtown Kelso, called Coweeman. The railroad station was named Cowlitz Station. The post office, the first post office to operate at that station was called Lower Cowlitz. Why didn't they just call it Cowlitz? Well, there was already a post office called Cowlitz in Cowlitz County up near Toledo. So couldn't have two Cowlitz, so they chose Lower Cowlitz. But then it was established again in 1877. They chose the name Coweeman, I suspect, because that was like maybe the next closest river to the post office. But this envelope is addressed to the Surveyor General in Olympia, Washington Territory. And the person in the office wrote that docketing on the left-hand side of the envelope, shown vertically there, and it explains some dates and what was in here and what the letter was about. And it's from some guy named P.W. Crawford. Peter Crawford. Does he have I heard somewhere he has something to do with the founding of Kelso? I don't know. So this was a letter Peter Crawford sent to the Territorial Surveyor General. Here's an early territorial postmark from Kelso. This was the first device used there. And here's another one. Anybody see anything kind of unusual with this one? Well, this postmark was the one that replaced the postmark shown in the previous slide, and it used to say Kelso Wash Ter, T-E-R, for Washington Territory. So this postmark was used while Washington was a territory. But after Washington's chief statehood in November of 1889, the postmaster carved out the TER, didn't bother getting a new device, thus creating this, what we call a new postmark type, since it's been carved out here. So he used this device for about a year after Washington became a state. Here's a view of Kelso from about that time, 1889, taken from the Cowlitz River. And like Woodland, it hasn't changed at all, has it? The Kelso post office operated in many different locations. We'll talk about one. This is called the Philo Hotel Building, shown here in 1931. It was originally called the Brooks Building on the northeast corner of Ash Street and Pacific Avenue. And it housed the post office, Kelso Post Office, for 10 years, from 24 to 34. The post office was in this storefront right here. Catlin. Well, Adam Catlin, who was the son of pioneer homesteader Seth Catlin, established a town site right across the Cowlitz River from Kelso in 1889. He platted the town site. He called it Marysville after his wife, but when they applied for a post office in 1892, so you can't call it Marysville. There's already a Marysville elsewhere in Washington. So he chose the name Catlin after himself, or after his wife, take your pick. And Catlin was right across the river from Kelso. And in 1908, the residents of Catlin held an election to determine if they wanted to become part of Kelso. And the measure passed. And so that part of Catlin was later that year absorbed into the city of Kelso. It's now called West Kelso. And the post office, though, operated all the way for almost a little more than a year after it became part of Kelso as Catlin. Kind of strange. Here's a picture of the Catlin waterfront in 1907. So it was kind of a busy place. Cougar. I mentioned earlier that Cougar operated in 3 periods here. And it was discontinued for the second time in 1936, and then the name changed from Yale. Well, Yale was a separate town. What's going on there? Well, we'll get back to that in a moment. This is a picture of the Cougar store that housed the Cougar post office from 1918 to 36. Amanda Robbins was the Cougar postmaster during its first period from 1902 to 1903, and then again from 1918 until it closed in 1936. Kind of keep in mind what this building looks like. Right above the door there's a sign that says Cougar PO. This is a postal card postmarked with the first day of Cougar and the last day of Yale. And we saw that the name was from Cougar was changed to Yale on August 1st, 1941. So this is called a philatelic card, which means a collector sent this to get postmarks from the post office name change. It wasn't, they didn't do this like ordinary mail. What happened? Well, Anna Griffith was the longtime postmaster. She served from 1904 to 1940. And she retired in 1940. She had to retire because she was 70 years old. So upon her retirement, postal inspectors were originally thought that they were just going to discontinue the post office at Yale. But then they made a decision. It would be better if instead of discontinuing it, we moved it somewhere. And the place they chose was the former site of Cougar. In fact, it's the same store that housed the Cougar post office, but with an awning and some other ornaments added here. When the Cougar post office closed in 1936. This is quite a rare picture here. I just wish it were focused a little better, but it housed the Yale post office. The Cougar store housed the Yale post office from January 1940 to July of 41. So the Yale post office moved to Cougar about 5 miles away in January of 1940 when Keith Slater was appointed the acting postmaster. Slater moved the post office into the old Cougar store. The woman sitting on the steps there is Slater's wife, Grace Slater. And on that sign, it says Cougar Store at the top. And you can see there's a plank added at the bottom. It says Yale Post Office. Probably can't see it, but that is what it says. As you can imagine, the people at Cougar, when they got their new post office, didn't really like it being called Yale. But Yale's down the road. That's not us. So they petitioned the post office department to change its name to Cougar, which was happened on July 31st, 1941. And we saw that postal card a couple slides back. Showing that changeover. Here's a postmark from the old Yale. Just to put it in perspective, it's from 1907. Anna Griffith, the Yale postmaster, had already been postmaster for 3 years, and she lasted when this was mailed. So she was a long time post office. This card had great service. It was mailed in the afternoon of November 29, 1907. There's a Woodland receiving postmark uses a transit mark that same day in the afternoon. It would then go up on the railroad up to Tenino, about 70 miles away. It was midnight on November 30th. Can you imagine that kind of service today? This was the original Yale post office here. It was at the residence of Mary Smith. It was about 2.5 miles south of the current community of Yale. Shown about 1901. It housed the post office until 1902, and the structure, along with many other, were lost in the Yakult burn of September of that year. When Anna Griffith became postmaster, the post office moved into possibly her residence at first, but then into the store that the Griffiths owned. Reno. Reno was up the Lewis River from Woodland, specifically, if you know where the Lewis River Salmon Hatchery is now. Okay, it's about, I don't know, what, 8 miles up from Woodland, something like that. Well, that's where Reno was. Reno was established in November 5 of 1912. The first postmaster, Effie Axtell, was commissioned February 17, 1913. So the post office probably began operating in late February, early March of 1913. Well, this has what's called a provisional manuscript. The post office was approved to operate, but it had not yet received its postmarking device. So they would apply a provisional manuscript postmark here, Reno, Washington. This is dated from March 19. And they had the departments very soon, by April, they were using a department supplied postmark. One thing that's interesting on this postcard, I'll have to get over here to read it. It says, I remember, and we have a new PO up here. So when you write, put on Reno instead of Woodland. So that proves that this is Reno, Washington without a doubt. This is the building that housed the Reno post office. It was a store. The sign right above the door reads Reno Post Office, but I can't see it here. There was a store and post office on the lower floor and a bunkhouse for area loggers on the top floor. Pigeon Springs was the site of a rustic resort and hotel 17 miles up the Kalama River. If you know where Gobar Creek flows into the Kalama River, it was just a little bit upstream from Gobar Creek on the south side of the Kalama River. It was interesting. It was the guy who eventually became postmaster, Lyman Wincoop was his name. In 1906, he purchased 80 acres of state school land containing some mineral springs that were called the Kalama River Springs. He renamed them Pigeon Springs because they were wild pigeons supposedly in the area. And he and his partner bottled the mineral water and sold it in Portland for $1 a gallon, which proves to me that you can sell anything to people in Portland. They sold it as a health elixir. I don't know if it helped you or not, but you know, who knows? So the problem was that the post office was then established in 1913. So sometimes later, Wincoop was the postmaster. Here's a picture of the facility. It was built from logs strewn on site on a bluff overlooking the Kalama River. Problem was, the Kalama River Road is not the widest road today, you know. Can you imagine in 1920s time period what that road must have looked like? Access from Kalama was costly and difficult. Supposedly the stage cost $2.50 to run up there. Now that's a lot of money in 1920 dollars. So the venture eventually failed, and Wincoop committed suicide in September 1923. He shot himself. He was 77 years old. And it's not known, although it's suspected, that right after that, since he was the postmaster, the post office stopped operating, but it was not officially discontinued until March of 1924. And this is a picture of the footbridge connecting the road on the north bank of the Kalama River, going over to the resort on the south side. All right, pop quiz number 2. When was Longview founded? What year? 23. Easy one, right? Okay, everybody got that one. Well, explain this. 1916, postmark from Longview. What? All right, this wasn't even a glint in an R.A. Long dream by that time, at that time. What happened? Well, there was another Longview in Washington that had been established in 1911 in Benton County, which I think is one county east of Klickitat. So over toward like north of the Dalles, that area, I believe. And it was a very small post office. So R.A. Long had always planned to use the name Longview for his planned city. He liked that name. It was the name of his estate in the Kansas City area. Well, they found out that, hey, there's already a Longview. So what do you do when you got a problem like this? You retain a lawyer. The lawyers contacted the postmaster of the Benton County Longview
And he said, well, I need a platform to cover a covered platform to protect mail that's thrown from the train in wet weather. Well, how much is that going to cost? Oh, about $25. He got $25 right away. And in exchange for that, he changed his name to the post office to Barger. That cleared the way for R.A. Long to use the name Longview. This is the earliest known postmark from Longview. The post office was established January 2nd, 1923. The post office actually began operating on January 16th. And so this was 1 week after the post office was established. Where did the post office exist in Longview? All these are discussed in the book, but 5 different places. Initially in the community building, we'll see pictures of a few of these. And it came into its current building, a federally owned building. They call it the Federal Building in April of 34. Here's the community building. This should not be confused with the community building where the YMCA was built. This was down Oregon Way, just north of Baltimore Street. And it housed the community building at the time was really the hub of all social and business activity for the new city. And the Longview Post Office operated in a corner of this building. Well, it outgrew these quarters very fast. And then in 1923, October 1st, 23, it moved into the Colonial Building. This building is still there on Commerce Avenue, but there's a lot of stuff built up around it now. The Longview Post Office was in this storefront right here. After that, the post office moved into the Columbia Theater building, which still stands, of course. This is the building about 5 weeks before it was opened, and the post office was in here for 5 years. The post office department signed a 5-year lease to lease space in that building. Contract stations. What are contract stations? Well, the post offices we've discussed to this point have been government facilities. That is, the postmaster is a government employee of the post office department. Contract stations started about 1900 or thereabouts, maybe a little earlier back east. And they were a post office operated inside of a business, but run by an employee or employees of that business. So the post office department contracted out this station, this post office to these people. The idea was the same as the old general store. Hey, you got a post office in my business. It's going to attract people there. The first post office, Kelso Station 1, was located in West Kelso. So in 1926 now, patrons could visit the contract station in West Kelso for most postal services and not have to worry about crossing the Cowlitz River to go to the main post office in Kelso. As you can see, it operated at a bunch of different locations here. How did contract stations work? Well, very briefly, the postmaster of the overseeing office, or the parent office, Kelso in this case, would advertise that, hey, we want a contract station in this area of town. Merchants could then bid and say, hey, I'll run this for $1,000. I'll do it for $1,200. I'll do it for $900. Well, the guy at $900, unless he was a crook, probably got the post office. And speaking of crooks, we had one here. March 1931, the post office moved into a place called Snipes Soda Shop at 102 West Main in West Kelso. The owner was a guy called Harry Snipes. In April, he was arrested. Why was he arrested? Well, they found liquor in his store and with the intent to sell. What was going on in 1931? Prohibition. That's a big no-no, Harry. Shouldn't do that. So he was also at the time on the Kelso City Council. Well, he was kicked off the council after he was found guilty the next month. He was kicked off the council, and I guarantee you the Kelso postmaster revoked his contract to run the station at that time. The other thing I'll point out is the office was officially established, the Kelso station was officially established in 1926, officially discontinued in 1960, but there were gaps in here when the post office did not operate as it moved from business to business. We'll just go through a few of the ones here. Kelso Station 2, and you can see it operated a bunch of different places. All of these are documented in the book, of course. Kelso Station 3 was later. Longview had 5 contract stations. The first was Longview Station 1, and it operated in 2 official periods. And it was the last numbered contract station in Cowlitz County. Maybe some of you folks remember Olympic Drug over on 15th Avenue. They had a little post office in there. That was Longview Station 1. The business closed in January of 2011, but the post office closed, the contract station closed December of 2010. Longview Station 2 had a really unique thing that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Longview Station 3 ran at a few different places. The last two were Longview Station 4 and 5, both operated from 54 to 57. Longview Station 4 was initially in a business called Home Supply and Service. And I think July of 54 is when the contract station opened, but the business went out of business in November or December of 54. And then the post office didn't operate until about a year and a half later when it was reestablished in Corner Cupboard Variety in Columbia Heights. So here's a case where the post office didn't operate for a year and a half, but was never officially discontinued. Here's a cover sent from Longview Contract Station 1 from Montgomery Ward, 1344 Commerce. And at the time, Station 1 was 3 doors down, 1350 Commerce and Gunderson's Rexall Drugstore. That's on the corner of Broadway and Commerce. What's all these stamps on here? Well, there's 20, 25, 3, 51 cents total postage. The stamps aren't canceled, but just with a little arc. Well, registered mail, there was a postal regulation adopted about 1910 that says you cannot cancel registered mail with something that shows the date and place of mailing. Wait a minute, I thought I had to show that on all the mail I canceled. Well, you do, but you have to cancel it on the back. Why? You have to place the cancels over the seam where the envelope was sealed. Why? Well, at the time, the post office department was apparently having a problem with registered mail poorly sealed or not sealed at all. And if the contents of a registered letter were lost, it's obviously registered, so it contains something valuable. And so the post office department would be on the hook for the indemnity of the registered item. So by placing a postmark on the back across the seal, it forced the postmaster or postal clerks to actually look at the back of the envelope and ensure it was sealed properly. The clerk in this contract station, there are 2 such postmarks on the back of this cover. The clerk on this station did a really nice thing in terms of postal history. He put another strike of it on the front because it's postal history. People like to look at the front of the envelopes much more than the back. Let's compare. In 1940, we said that took 51 cents. Here's the breakdown of the rates. The first class letter then cost 3 cents per ounce. Now it's 73 cents. The registration fee with $50 to $75 indemnity cost a quarter. The minimum indemnity now is up to $100. Now, $50 to $75 in 1940 is a lot more than $100 now, of course. And so, but the minimum registration for any indemnity is $19, but it actually would have cost more than that. The return receipt showing where it was delivered used to cost 23 cents. Now it's $4.10. So the total postage in 1940 on that for those services was 51 cents. Now it's at least $24.13. This is the Park and Shop Shopping Center. It's located on the Kelso-Longview boundary where Washington Way and Vandercook Way kind of intersect over there. Really interesting here. Longview Station 2 operated in 2 businesses in the center. It's called the shopping center, but it's really, by today's standards, we call it basically a strip mall. It operated there, first in the Park and Shop grocery store, then in the Park and Shop pharmacy between 1950 and 57. What was unusual? Well, I said this was right on the Kelso-Longview boundary. The front of the stores were in Longview and had a Longview street address. The back of the stores were in Kelso. The post office, the contract station, was physically in Kelso, but the businesses had a Longview street address, so the post office the contract station was assigned to the Longview post office. To my knowledge, this is the only case anywhere in the country where a contract station assigned to one office was physically in the jurisdiction of another post office, Kelso in this case. Really unusual. And there was a lot of complaints about this, that this should have been assigned to Kelso instead of Longview and blah, blah, blah. And if you go hunt through the daily news, you'll see a whole bunch of stories about the people were fighting about this. In the 1980s, the Postal Service changed the name of contract stations to the longer name, contract postal units. Basically, it's the same thing. 5 of these operated in Longview. The only one still there is C&L Auto Licensing on 14th Avenue. That's still there. All these others are gone. And the reason why they're gone and when specifics about them is all told in the book. One thing I will mention is we saw Station 1, the one that was at Olympic Drug, that operated until 2010. Long after they adopted this contract postal unit terminology. Well, these numbered stations were grandfathered in, and even though they were then called contract postal units, they were saying their names. So the Olympic Drug Post Office was always Longview Station 1 never on Longview Olympic CPU or something like that. We're running a little late here. I'll just briefly go over railway post offices. There were many railway post offices that ran in through Cowlitz County, but the only one that had a terminus in Cowlitz County was called the Colton Kalama. What was a railway post office? Basically a post office on wheels. It would collect mail from post offices along the line. People could mail at railroad depots. They could mail letters, which were then placed on the train and canceled on the railway post office. You could write a letter on the train and mail it directly there on the train. And if they found any letters that for some reason were not postmarked, not canceled, then they would cancel them. So it's hard to see, but this is a leather postcard showing the Colton Kalama RPO. Ran for officially for just about a little over a year and a half, 1907 to 1908. This card was mailed from Woodland, so presumably at the Woodland Depot. But among these other duties, the railway postal clerks had the responsibility of sorting mail en route. So instead of doing this at the post office, it was pretty much a post office on wheels, so to speak. RFD routes, Cowlitz County had a few. Here they are. What kind of RFD routes were there? Well, typically there were three types. A rural free delivery was established in 1896 by the Post Office Department as a way to deliver and collect mail in rural areas at no charge. Prior to that, these people would have to go into the post office to mail things, would have to go into the post office to collect their mail. So one of the more common was a loop where you'd have several patrons and you'd wind up route, the carrier would start distributing post office and wind back up there at the same place later. Some were out and back where he'd trace the same route going back as going out. And then kind of a hybrid of these is the lollipop, where part of the route was traced the same and then part of it was a loop. Okay, let's take a look what happened there. Now, starting in 1900, the Post Office Department began supplying hand-stamped postmark devices to rural carriers, instructing them to cancel all mail on their route, collected on their route. Okay, good so far. The Post Office Department discontinued supplying these devices in 1903, stating that, well, if you were a carrier and you had one, you could keep using it, no problem. But when a new route was established, you had to cancel the mail in an indelible pencil by hand. And you had to write the town name, the route number, the state name, the date you mailed it. Few RFD carriers complied with it. You can imagine how much time that would take. So a lot of them would just do a scribble across the stamp to deface the stamp to prevent it from being reused. So patron A, at this same time, the rural carriers were said, well, if you have an item that can be delivered somewhere down the line, farther along your route, that same day, deliver it to them. Otherwise, take it back to the post office. So in the loop case, if A was mailing something to B, that could be delivered the same day. But if B was mailing something to A, it would go back to the post office for normal postmark and then sent out by the RFD carrier the next day. That leads to this. This is a down-the-line postmark from Castle Rock Route 1, July 7, 1911. I love the message. Dear Bill, please, what does it say? Come over this evening, Friday, as I want to see you. CM with a couple of little hearts down there. Well, I guess CM had a thing for Mr. William Nelson, or Bill. I take it this was not Willie Nelson, the country singer. That was even a bit before his time. The postmark is, it's hard to decipher, but it's July 7, 1911. That was a Friday. So the sender here, CM, knew that Bill Nelson would receive this postcard the same day. Hey, come over tonight. I call this 1911 text messaging. Yeah, the final thing we're going to talk about here is event covers, which are specially prepared envelopes or cards to commemorate certain events. The Longview Bridge, we've probably driven over it a bunch of times between here and Rainier, opened in 1930. Prior to that, you got between Longview and Rainier on a ferry boat. And the mail route between Longview and Rainier used that ferry. 2 trips a day except for Sunday, I think it was. Well, in March 29, 1930, when the bridge opened, the mail route was changed to go over the bridge instead of using the ferry. The bridge opened at 2 p.m. on March 29, and 2 hours later, the first mail went from Rainier to Longview, and mail carried on that trip had this little, we call it a cachet or a little stamp down here called first mail across the bridge. And it says Columbia River Bridge. That was its original name. Now it's Lewis and Clark Bridge, of course. And note the annotation that the sender wrote at the bottom down there, please save. So they knew, hey, this was kind of cool. One more event cover, the Kelso Post Office. Looks a lot the same today, doesn't it? Well, it is. That's because it opened in this building January 1st, 1936 in this federally owned building. And so collectors could send envelopes to get postmarked. And then the post office would apply this little printed cachet to their envelopes and mail them back to them. Postmark catalog is a big part of the book. What is a postmark catalog? It documents all postmarks known from each post office in the area under study, in this case, Cowlitz County. Here's the entry from Lexington, which I had a post office from 1888 to 1917. There are 4 postmark types known from Lexington. The earliest known use are EKU and the latest known use are LKU are not the times that postmark was placed in service. It is just the earliest known example of that postmark or the latest known example from that postmark. It was most likely placed in service before then and taken out of service after. Very few post offices, especially smaller towns, use more than one different postmark at the same time. So we can see a transition here from the type 1 from 1903, then in February of 2004, we see type 2 being used until November of 2007, then in June of 2008, type 3 was used and so on. This tells me, I can study this, that there was possibly a manuscript cancel used when Lexington was established, but because of the tight gaps between the different postmarks here, and knowing the time when the Post Office Department issued each of these types of devices, I feel very confident in saying the only new postmark that we might discover from Lexington is a manuscript postmark before 1890. After that, I can't see any new postmarks existing. So the postmark catalog is a snapshot. As soon as the book is published, somebody is going to find, hey, I found a later of this one, or I found a new postmark. Well, we have a website set up, the cowlitzbook.com website, where you'll be able to see new finds, both in terms of new towns, in case anybody finds one of the Davenport, Lower Cowlitz, or Olokwa postmarks, new types of postmarks from post offices where postmarks are known, or postmarks that extend the earliest or latest usage dates for a known postmark. And that's it. Sorry I ran a little late. Okay. I'm going to open this up to the friends on Zoom here. You can buy it in the Cowlitz County Historical Museum bookstore tonight. In fact, the book is priced at $35. The museum gets a chunk of that, so you're supporting the museum as well. And if you so desire, I'll be more than happy to autograph your copies. Let me see if I can get this in gallery view here. Okay, she may have some. Yeah, while Joanne's doing that, does anybody have any questions here?
Is it going to be a sequel?
No. Somebody told me the other day that you should do these. Washington has 39 counties. And they said, you should do this for the other 38 counties. I figured that would take me about 240 years. So I'm gonna, that's a hard pass. Okay. Yes.
One of the covers have rock,
Mhm.
but it's addressed to him. They have an Esquire. What's the title of an Esquire?
It generally means a lawyer. Okay. But if you were kind of a bigwig, you might be called, that guy looks like an Esquire to me. So it was somebody who had some important stance within the community, but the technically correct term is it means you're a lawyer. Yeah. Or a judge. I mean, that cover addressed to Judge Marquam from Castle Rock was addressed to the PA Marquam Esquire. So. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Also, is that the why would the Kelso station line?
Where the contract station or the Kelso post office? It did. They were in the 100 block and 200 block of generally of West Main. And so, all in West, the Kelso Station one was all in West Kelso. It operated a bunch of different locations. But yeah, it was, in fact, one of the buildings that housed the Palm Confectionery and Snipe Soda Shop at 102 West Main was at the southwest corner of Main and West Main, and I guess that's First Avenue. They just tore that building down not too long ago. And that was the site for the post office contract station one, at least in 2 different places. Any questions from the online folks? Joseph, did we get any questions from online? Okay. For the benefit of those folks on Zoom, if they want to purchase a copy of the book, they can make a round trip flight to Kelso International Airport up here and get one at the museum. Or if it's easy, you can order one through cowlitzbook.com. There's an orders page on that.
I like your forensic analysis of looking at all the postmarks to find, we look at a letter and know it was between this state and this state based on the cost of the stamp.
Right.
The postmark style, the name of the town. I do that with, I love looking at globes in old stores, and I can look at, if it's got French Equatorial Africa on it and West Bengal or East Pakistan, I know it's within a certain range. And so there's ways of doing that with postal, mailings, but anything else, anything that's manufactured and handled by humans or marked by humans, there's a way to kind of at least isolate at that time. I like how you illustrate that.
And you can do that for some postmarks. Obviously, postmarks that contain a year help identify it very, very directly. But during the 19th century, especially with manuscript postmarks and even hand stamp postmarks, it was not uncommon to omit the year, just a month and day. And so those can be sometimes extremely tough. Like the Oak Point one that we showed, it's either 1853 or 54. We don't know which, but it's got to be one of those two based on what I said about that item. Yes.
I was very interested in the penmanship of these. I think there'll become a time that we're not able to read cursive. It's a lost art. So many of
them. Yeah, it is.
Writing.
Yeah, I agree. And you notice that almost every one of those items was written in longhand or cursive. Alexander Abernethy, who was the first Oak Point postmaster, he had a very distinctive handwriting style for that time. And when I first saw that Oak Point cover with his manuscript postmark, I thought this just doesn't look right. It could be a fake. But then when you see other examples, including letters signed by him, he uses this very fabulous handwriting. It just was different from anything else circa 1850, 1860. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry I ran a little over here. I did a dry run of this. I guess I talked longer than my dry run. I apologize, but I hope I didn't put you to sleep too much. So, all right. Thank you very much.